to The Waterfall,
a video podcast and community in which we explore well-being, sustainability, the arts, and technology, as well as sharing our experience of slow travel around Europe.
In this episode, we hear from Professor Paul Gilbert OBE, a renowned British clinical psychologist whose books include the international bestsellers Overcoming Depression and The Compassionate Mind. He has also authored over 300 academic papers.
We visited him at Markeaton Lodge of the University of Derby in the UK, where the Compassionate Mind Foundation is based.
We began by asking him what compassion is and how he became interested in it.
Compassion is not just about being kind and soft and friendly. It's a real determination to address the causes of suffering. That's what it is, right? And that requires courage and wisdom. I trained as an economist first, and then I became a psychologist. I retrained as a psychologist and then as a therapist. And one of the key issues with people who have mental health problems is they find it very difficult to be compassionate to themselves. They're often very hostile, critical, dislike themselves and so forth. And many have come from backgrounds of neglect or abuse or criticalness, so they haven't always received a lot of compassion within their early lives. I was an evolutionary psychologist, so very interested in the evolution of different motivational systems, such as the evolution of competitive behavior, which of course we see in most species, particularly males competing to get to the top and being aggressive to all the ones below them. And compassion, which is rooted in caring behavior, the evolution of caring behavior, particularly between mother and baby, and the way in which the brain evolves capacities to be sensitive and attentive to the suffering and needs of another person. Competitiveness, excessive competitiveness, actually suppresses those brain areas. So when an individual is very competitive, their capacities for empathy and paying attention to the needs of others, I'm afraid, gets rather pushed down. We're certainly not very compassionate to people we regard as our enemies. In fact, to people we regard as our enemies, we can be exactly the opposite of compassionate. We can be vicious, cruel, and callous.
We went to Bhutan to look at how they were seemingly using happiness as a measure instead of growth.
Yes.
And what we discovered when we got there was that that wasn't the only thing that was making their society work. It's also partly the fact that they have a long tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. And they also have people living in extended families. So it's like compassion is ingrained in their society. So it's not that you can just change the metric and then suddenly the whole society works.
No, that's right. Good point. Excellent point. And interestingly enough, right, about 2 million years ago, when our ancestors, because in a lot of primates, dominant males are quite aggressive and they get power. The subordinates started to gang up and form alliances of 2, 3, and 4, and push the dominants out. And that became so successful that over the subsequent 2 million years, maybe a little longer, a little less, that grew as a way of organizing your group. So that moved towards egalitarianism. So hunter-gatherers, right, they were groups of about 150, and status was based on contribution. It was not, but you couldn't take it, you couldn't own it, you couldn't, exploit other people with your power, because then you got kicked out of the group. So for a long time, humans became under evolutionary pressure to be a contributor. And humans love being contributors. That's why you have the internet. You can learn anything on the internet. You can learn how to make fairy cakes or fix your car, because people want to tell you, they want to share things, right? So we have this natural desire to share and care, basically. So that's great. And if you can harness that, as they do, as you say in Bhutan, that whole concept of sharing and caring, which is integrated into the community, because the community is of a size and a structure that facilitates that. The problem comes when you have these segregated families, maybe with just a couple of parents and the children, who are somewhat disconnected from their community, and the community is such that you don't really have a sense of being connected because it's big, and the way in which estates and housing systems are built and all that. So you've got a brain that's designed for caring and sharing. That's when people feel happiest. But you've got a culture that absolutely pushes them in the opposite direction to be self-focused, achievement-focused, ambitious, ruthless, like some of the people, billionaires of the world. Are very ruthless, really. So it's the point you're making is how do you create a care and share psychology where you are concerned with the welfare of the people that are in your community in the cultures that really do not support that. They support go get, be tough, strong, be ruthless, put yourself first. The big psychology after the war was to create a better world. And if you look at the United Nations 1948 Charter of Rights, it's amazing, it's wonderful, it's really fantastic. So all the ideas are there, except they set up the Security Council, which was going to undermine it. So you could start undermining, you could veto against. But 1948 was a really important point. And then if you look at Europe, what happened certainly in the UK is we taxed the rich, but we built a national health service that was the end of the world. We had no money. We just fought a war. We owed the Americans a packet. We built rail services. We built schools. We built universities. Universities were being built during the 50s and 60s. It was amazing. Why? Because we had that psychology that now we've come through this war. Now we're going to pull together. Now we're going to nest build. Now we're going to build communities. We're all confined, and that was great up until the 70s, and then slowly, and the unions were part of this. Yeah, but what about if we could have a little bit more of the pie? And that competitiveness started to creep back in. And then, of course, we had Thatcher and Reagan, who reintroduced competitive psychology. It's all about competing, you first, look at it. And the rest of it, they say, is history. So we undid all of the basic sentiments. We betrayed the psychology of the 50s, 40s, and 50s. We have betrayed it. And now we have the right wing have got control over resources. They've got control over the media. They orientate the discussions. I mean, from the European Union, when Britain came out of Brexit, the right wing media was just awful, just really little Englanders and so on. So the point is, we haven't really found ways to inhibit that which undermines compassion, which is this compete, and be ruthless, that ruthless competition. And what we have now is it's just a madness where the individuals in the world are so wealthy they can now buy political power. Democracy is going down the tubes because people can simply buy it. You take, for example, BP and these other companies were just beginning to invest in green energy, and then along comes somebody in America, it says drill, baby, drill. And what happens? They all start, okay, well, there is a callousness in the companies that are generating the climate problems. They just don't care as long as they got money in their pocket, right? Different governments become hoarders and they want to keep things to themselves. So redistribution is absolutely essential. One of the important things I think when people think about this, particularly colonial past, is to make a very clear distinction between shaming and guilting. Now, shaming is linked into rank. And so when people are shamed, they're made to feel bad and they've done something bad and so on and so on. And when you do that, they become defensive because nobody wants to feel bad, do they? They push it away. And the way the brain processes shaming is through what we call the threat system. It's a threat. On the other hand, guilt evolved from the care system in the brain. So guilt evolved with attachment and looking after to stop the parent unintentionally injuring the infant. And if they did, they'd have to notice, and do something about it. So guilt really is focused on the recognition of having done harm. And that generates not a sense of a bad self, but it generates a sense of sadness and remorse. It generates the ability to be empathic, to imagine if that were me, if that, you know, if you think about slavery, if that was me, if that was my family that were carried and changed, how would I be? So you make that empathic bridging into the pain of the other that's been caused by whatever. And guilt is a very powerful, compassionate process. Shame, on the other hand, turns off empathy. You don't empathize with shame because you're busy defending yourself against feeling bad and being blamed. So I think the psychology that we use when we're helping people face up to the tragedies, because that's what they are, of the past, because all societies, all the empires, Chinese, the Greeks, the Romans, they all had slaves, because humans are not particularly that species. If we can help people just become more empathic to the needs of the other, right? Rather than thinking, oh, we should do this, or we ought to pay, whatever. Don't go down that road. Just imagine that's you. Just imagine that's you, right? Have an empathic connection to the suffering of the other. And compassion is, I don't want that to continue. I want to redistribute, not because I'm a bad person and I have to pay back my debts, but because I don't want you to suffer. I don't want that. So it's a very different psychology when we engage with a compassionate approach to redistribution, because I want to see something fair, not because I feel bad about the past, because I want something today, I want something tomorrow, I want to make a better world for tomorrow.
Today we're seeing a very polarized discussion going on about the climate. On the one hand, there are people who are trying to raise attention and draw attention to this, to what's going on by destroying works of art and so on, just to be in the news, because that's what the news media covers these days, disruptive behaviour. We have also a cost of living crisis, and we also have all the other different crises that we're now facing, and that perhaps compassion takes a back seat because we're busy trying to tackle the everyday crisis or everyday challenges that we're facing. In that context, do we wait until we've sorted out the cost of living crisis before we become compassionate again?
Obviously, it's not an either or. You have to do all of it at the same time. It's like swimming. You know, you can't just use one arm and you use your two arms and two legs, right? So the key thing is understanding how you get all of it going together, right? So not just one and then that and that. And I think the interesting thing about the advocacy on climate change is, again, what is the motive behind it? So if people get very angry about it, which absolutely I can understand, if you act from that position of anger, then that's what you do. You start destroying works of art and you all that stuff. Anger is not a good motivation system, right? So you have to think about, okay, what would be the compassionate way to bring attention, to mobilize people to think about that? Just don't have a few activists that go out and people think, what are they doing that for? That's alienating. You know, just because they're angry, they want to do something. That's alienating. The real intelligence is, how do we mobilize the millions to get involved with this? How do we mobilize communities? How do we help communities support themselves to start to adopt more compassionate ways of living? That's where the advocacy, that's where the energy needs to go. So there are many things that we can do that we're not doing, which is advocating the positiveness of addressing climate change. What's the positiveness of having clean air? Can you imagine having clean air that your children are not going to have their lungs polluted and so forth? So take a sort of a joy and an enthusiasm for producing change. This is something we really want to do. We really want this. We really want our country. We really want to see our trees prosper. We really want our clean air to be. So anger is understandable, but it's really how we mobilize the energies for creating the positive, what we want, and making very clear and putting a lot of energies into creating that. And I don't think there's been anywhere near enough thought about how we stimulate communities to go out and create movements about what they want.
You can find more details behind Professor Paul Gilbert's recommendations by reading his recent publications, including the book Living Like Crazy. You will find links to his publications, the Compassionate Mind Foundation, Compassion in Politics, and the Global Compassion Coalition in the description of this episode and in the Waterfall Community.
In the next episode of The Waterfall, we'll be hearing from former World Bank Energy team leader Mohua Mukherjee.
Until then, Kaberi and I look forward to reading your reflections about this episode in the Waterfall community on Discord.